I had decided that I was going to end my life. I had enough. And I had spent a lot of time thinking about how I was going to do that. And finally, down to this little side street and near my house, and that side street intersected with a busy road, and had decided that I was going to push my wheelchair into oncoming traffic. And I was sitting there and I was watching the sun setting that day, and I was looking into the sun, and I realized in that moment that I might not succeed, that I could injure myself even worse and just be a vegetable for the rest of my life, or I would succeed and completely destroy my family. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm absolutely powerless. I've come to the place in my life where I have no idea what how I ever got here. Religion had failed me, entertainment had failed me, everything had failed me. And I guess you'd call it a prayer. Something deep on the inside of me that I think is existent in every human being spoke. And I just said, I don't know who or what you are or who I'm even talking to, but there has to be a reason why. And there has to be a way that this works. Hi, everybody. I'm Caleb Bartlett, and I'm here on Your Superior Self.
Caleb, my man, I just want to say thank you for reaching out and connecting with me. It was funny. You reached out to me and I got your email. I was in California and I was on vacation, not really doing too much with the podcast, just kind of being with the family.
Right.
Got your message and listened to watched a couple of your YouTube videos. And I have to tell you, man, like I was watching them back to back because it was really interesting, your story.
Cool.
So thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, man. It's an honor to be here. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then I read your book. And then I was like, "Holy crap, man! There's so much stuff in here that can apply to anyone, any one of us who are suffering in this reality." But reading your story definitely puts things in perspective. So why don't we start there, man? Let's. Well, actually, you know what? Let's do this first. Let's. I'm very curious now after reading your material and watching your channel. Like Caleb, how do you experience this reality?
well, that's an interesting question. I wasn't expecting that to lead off. But how do I experience this reality? Well, the more I grow and develop on this path of life, the more I learn that our inner world is reflected in our outer world. And what do I mean by that? So the outer world, as I've come to experience it, is a projection of our inner emotional state, our inner thought state. The great spiritual traditions across the world, whether you're on an Eastern path or a Western path or what what you follow, all talk about a higher reality, uh, a reality beyond the material realm that's bigger, greater, and actually is that this material realm is within that reality. It's not something that is outside of us, or something that's just on the inside of us. But we live and we move and we have our being in this reality. So that's kind of a loaded question. And so in that experience for me, it's about how do I understand and interpret both the pleasure and the pain and everything in between on the inside. So what is this experience in this moment telling me about who I am on the inside in myself? And what is it telling me about what I need to change, what I need to develop, who I need to become? What is it telling me about my past? What is it telling me about my future? And what is it telling me about it's kind of I look at the material realm as a kind of I likened it one time to the check engine light on your dashboard. It kind of tells you it's a reflector of who you really are and where you're at, you know? And we are our thoughts and our emotions and our actions and our words and our deeds. They help create that. They do create that reality ultimately. So collectively, what we see around us as the physical world, and if you look at some of the traditions in the spiritual traditions, particularly some of the things that I have come to understand and embrace and experience, like Kabbalah, for example, Hermetic Kabbalah, is that the outer world is basically created by the collective consciousness of the brotherhood of humanity. That our minds are powerful, powerful things, and we don't even realize how powerful our thoughts and our words and our deeds truly are. And collectively, we create a world of both pleasure and pain, and that we're here to experience. And the reason we're here to experience it is so we can grow, we can change, we can evolve, and we can develop. And the more we learn to interpret those experiences, the more the higher realities will open up more and more to us, and we'll be able to experience more maturity and relate to each other in a more harmonious, compassionate, powerful way.
Mm,
Yeah.
it's a tough
So,
question, dude. Like,
yeah, yeah.
you talk about
So,
high realities. Like, what does that look like? Have you tapped into those high realities, or is that just a different perspective on this reality?
um, well, there are higher realities. There are higher levels of being, higher levels. One of the laws that governs the existence of of life is the law of vibration, and that law talks about how there are stages of vibration, and that everything that exists is a vibration. And so, have I experienced those higher realities? I would say that yes, and it is possible to experience those higher realities. That experience is difficult to elucidate in words, um, because ultimately, for all of us, it doesn't really matter, whether you can say, yes, there are higher realities, or no, there are not higher realities, or define what that is until you can actually experience what that is. So ultimately, and I really feel that, and I've come to understand this in my own life, whether it's wealth or success or health or relationships, ultimately, the only things that are really meaningful that we can really speak to, any of us, is what we know through direct experience that we've verified. Like, for instance, when we first met, you talked about being a dad, and I'm not a dad, so I can think about what it might be like to be a dad. you know I could I have a niece, I have a family member, that I know what it's like to be an uncle, but I don't know what it's like to be a dad, you know? And I could tell people, this is how you need to raise your kids, or this is what a good dad
I
does.
love those people, by the way. That
Right,
tell
yeah,
me.
exactly, they're a lot of fun, right? Yeah, and it's like, what do they call that? The armchair quarterback and the backseat
Sure. Yeah.
driver,
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but until you have a kid, you don't know, you really can't know. And so that, for me, is actually one of the dividing lines, I think, between religion and the authentic spiritual path, or the mystery tradition, is direct experience, because you can stand behind a pulpit or an altar and say what God is, or dictate what a higher reality is. But until someone has really experienced that for themselves, you can't really know what that actually means. And so, and I think that applies to anything in life. Like, for instance, I heard somebody say one time, don't take financial advice from somebody who doesn't have money, you know? So it's kind of the same way, So the question of a higher reality is like, I could say, yeah, I have experienced it and what that means. But even so, there are humans on this planet, and humans that have lived in existence, who live in those states, and live in higher levels of consciousness and higher levels of awareness, can see into different levels of existence. Am I there yet? No. But I want to be, I want to develop. And I know that it's in my life, I've seen and experienced that it's possible. It's definitely possible to grow to that point and to develop.
Sure.
So,
I mean, I
yeah.
love listening to these types of experiences because it just, what is the possibility for the human potential of consciousness, like,
Oh,
to
yeah.
reach, like, so I love
It
really
is.
talking about
Yeah.
that. But to your
Yeah.
point though, like, um, people, masters, teachers have spoken about higher levels of consciousness, but do you
Mhm.
really, it sounds great, but how do you really know unless you experience that? And I think
You do, yeah,
that's
you gotta
the
experience.
carrot, right? Like the carrot is higher levels of experience, but we
Yeah,
don't fully understand like what it takes to get there, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
lot of hard work because of the conditioning and the programming that we experience here. And
yeah,
it's kind of like, we just in the West, I would say probably, where I grew up in a very rich, dogmatic, religious, systematic type of tradition where,
yeah,
it creates a lot of good versus evil, kind of like these are the commandments. This is what you do to reach
sure.
heaven. And, I just never questioned any of this. Like there wasn't
Right,
an alternate
yeah,
path. But as you grow spiritually or become more curious, things happen throughout your life that kind of spark more deeper curiosity towards the mysteries and like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, why am I
yeah.
following this tradition? And a lot of it contradicts itself. So, what was it in your path, right? Let's go ahead and begin by giving the listeners and audience some context about your story. Like, I know your story is very deep and it's very rich with experience. How did it start for you? Do you want to talk about the accident that kind of started this ball rolling towards spirituality and realization?
Sure, absolutely, but before I do, I'd just like to comment on something you just said that kinda spurred a thought in my brain, and that is that you said that these masters and teachers and this kind of awareness and understanding that what if there's something bigger, this higher reality. I think that exists in every human being. I think we all understand intrinsically somehow that we're part of a greater whole, that we're part of something that is higher, and that aspiration to know and to understand and think, just everybody asks the question, why are we here? We all ask that question. And and I think really, especially people who have suffered in trauma or physical suffering or pain, are they're looking for something to answer that question. And so the higher reality experience and seeking that and what it actually takes to get there, we want it desperately, but in a lot of ways it takes a lot of work, and it almost takes a relentless courage and a determination and a willingness to look at the parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at. We got to look at the ugly, and go in and say, you know what, I'm there's some dark stuff in there, and to
There's
look
some
at it
dark
and
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and really say, but at the same time fall in love with it, you know look at it and be like, and love it anyway, you
People
know
hear that and they're like, "How can you fall in love with the dark?" Right? Like, how can you
yeah,
fall in love with those parts of yourself that you're ashamed of, right? But you're only ashamed because of the conditioning that you've been brought up with. A lot of the things that are dark within you
exactly.
have been created from your experience that has been conditioned. And once you start awakening to these different aspects of yourself, how can you not love them? Because you know that what is dark in you is dark in me. It's the same.
Exactly. Well, it also, I think what happens is that when you honestly look at yourself, you begin to recognize it in other people, and you have compassion. You recognize, I'm no different than that person, and compassion is really the way forward. Um, and so one of the things that can, like you said, the conditioning, the idea of which a lot of times one of the things that holds us back is self judgment the most. Because if we look at that and we think, oh, that's bad, then we think, oh, must be a terrible person, but that only exacerbates the belief because you judge yourself. So, anyway, I just wanted to add that to what you were saying, but so we
Yeah,
might
dude.
that
Yeah.
that might happen a lot because
It's gonna happen a lot. I can tell you that
yeah,
because,
yeah,
like, we're
right.
riffing off each other right
Yeah,
now, and it's
yeah,
like, yeah, you go
totally.
down a rabbit hole, I go down a rabbit hole, and then it's like we never
Yeah,
get back to the point. So,
for
before we
sure.
go down like 1,000 rabbit holes, let's just start at the
Let's
beginning.
start at the beginning. Yeah, for sure. So the accident. So give people a little bit of background on me. I just turned 47. When I was 16 years old, I had a diving accident, and I was swimming with some friends, and I dove into the swimming pool, and I flipped over and I landed across the back of my neck on the bottom of the pool, and I fractured the C5, C6 vertebrae in my neck, and that resulted in a spinal cord injury. And I don't know how many people know about how much people listening might know about spinal cord injury, but apparently when the but apparently what am I saying? When the spinal cord is damaged, Um, According to medical science, there's no cure for that. And it's kind of the holy grail of medical science is to be able to regenerate the spinal cord. And what resulted from that was paralysis and having to use a wheelchair and depending physically on the assistance of other people and a host of other medical complications that come with that. And so that process was I spent 3.5 weeks um, and I talk about this in the book. I spent 3.5 weeks in intensive care. I almost died. I was on a ventilator and a breathing machine. I couldn't inflate my lungs. I had critical pneumonia, a series of infections, and then I was able to survive that. And I spent 4 months in rehabilitation in the hospital, and then I came home. And one of the things that was traumatic about that experience was the fact that I had grown up in what would be known to most people in the US as the charismatic evangelical church. And I will might get into that in a little bit, but just a quick disclaimer, I'm not here to mm, trash anybody's belief or anything. That was an experience that was intrinsic to me and part of my growth. Um, and because of that environment that I grew up in and the church environment that I grew up in, I largely believed in miracles. And I believed in them so much that what I did was I avoided the things that I needed to do to take care of my body and the therapy that I needed to go to. And I became very withdrawn into the world and I stayed home and I didn't I mean I wasn't a shut in, I did live an active life. I went to college and things like that, but I didn't I wanted to escape. I really spent a lot of time trying to escape the pain and actually used spirituality or my religious path as an escape. I buried myself under the belief that one day God was going to heal me and save me from this pain. And so when that didn't happen, and a lot of other things happened, I this was a long journey. I mean, it's been 30 years now. And so for the first 7 years or so, that was what I experienced. I was in that religious world and stayed there. And then gradually it began to unfold. And one of the ways that it began to unfold was I began to ask questions. And actually, one of the things that began to spur the questions was, first of all, I was noticing that I wasn't changing as a person. I was noticing that the same desires, the same anger, the same jealousy, the same rage, the same bitterness that I had even before the accident, the attributes of my personality that I knew I wanted to change were not changing just by what I was being told I should do. Then the second thing that happened was I was noticing that the church system, and this is not to get into any politics or anything really, but I was noticing that in particular in the United States, that the church world was becoming polarized politically. And that started raising a lot of questions for me and just moral, ethical questions. And and so I began to look more closely at, for the first time in my life, at church history. And I began to look at the history of church and politics mixed together. And I began to look at the history of the life of some of the preachers and teachers that I was following after. And what I discovered was much more than politics. I discovered that I was taking an honest look at their lives and that it wasn't really blending with the teachings that they were putting out at the same time. I was seeing these inconsistencies and hypocrisies and incongruities, but I was also seeing them in myself. And so that raised a deeper question than just, oh, I mean, anybody, it's easy to cry hypocrisy, you know, everybody has looked at a spiritual leader in every religion and be like, oh, that's a hypocrite. That's just part and parcel of the game. But what it raised for me was something deeper. It was more intrinsic. I looked at myself and I thought, why am I following this if it's not working? What about this is failing? And that was a big moment because it was like, what do I really believe? What do I really think? What do I really and then ultimately the question became, what do I really know? Do I know this? I mean, can I prove it? Can I what is this? And so and then that raised another question was, okay, if I can't, then what does it say about the accident? Why did the accident happen? Why am I paralyzed? Who is God? Did God paralyze me? Am I in this wheelchair because of myself? Am I in it? What is the reason? There has to be a reason for this. Suffering can't just be some random empty thing. What is why the winds of fate? Why do good things, bad things happen to good people? And why do seemingly good things happen to bad people? You know, what is this? Why? Why does this work the way that it works? And so that set me on a quest. And that quest lasted about 10 years. And I looked into everything. I looked into Buddhism. I looked into Judaism. I looked into Hinduism. I looked into paganism. I looked into Tantra. I went everywhere that I could go. And I went into the darker things as well to cover up the pain. So I I got into, chat rooms and pornography and trying to bury, what was happening to me. And it was just this 10 years of turmoil. It was crazy. But at the same time, it was a spiritual search. It was concurrent. And it was just part of the process. It was just part of the process. And I went through this time where I just was looking for everything that I could find that would answer this question of why. And then ultimately, I began to have a series of experiences where those things that I had looked into, all the different religious traditions and all of the things that I was using to self medicate that I just talked about, they weren't working either. They weren't solving the problem. And when that happened, I just realized that it was the same as the religion. It had just become another religion. It had just become another system that I was trying to base my life upon, trying to find the question of why. And so through that, I ended up, I had come to the point where I was constantly failing in business. Everything that I was trying to do, I mean, everything in my life that I tried to do, relationships, business, church, religion, changing myself, it was just failing. It was a failure. And I was at bottom. I was really at bottom. And I had come to a place where, and I talk about this in the book as well, where I was completely financially broke and I was in debt. And I was dependent on the state, and I had tried to start a business, and that fell through, and I had used money that a family member had given me. I had no way to pay them back, and they were not happy about that situation at all.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And it was a family member that I had a history of not getting along with, which was stupid in the first place. I mean, I just gone from one dumb decision to the next, and all trying to answer this question of why. And finally, in August of 2009, I had decided that I was going to end my life. I'd had enough, and I had spent a lot of time thinking about how I was going to do that. And finally, um, I I went and I talk about this in the book. I went down to this little side street and near my house, and that side street intersected with a busy road, and I was had decided that I was going to push my wheelchair into oncoming traffic. And I know it feels weird to talk about it now or to hear somebody talk about it in such a matter of fact way, but this is the reality of what I experienced. And and I was sitting there and I was watching the sun setting that day, and I was looking into the sun, and it was a warm day and the traffic was busy, and all it would have taken would have just push. And I realized that in that moment that I might not succeed, that I could injure myself even worse and just be a vegetable for the rest of my life. Or I would succeed and completely destroy my family. And the weight of that moment just came down on me And I was sitting there thinking, I'm absolutely powerless. I've come to the place in my life where I have no idea what how I ever got here or why. And I have no way out. No way out. Religion had failed me. Entertainment had failed me. Everything had failed me. And I guess you'd call it a prayer. I don't know what I did. I s something deep on the inside of me that I think is existent in every human being spoke to the infinite consciousness that created all of us. And I just said, "I don't know who or what you are or who I'm even talking to, but there has to be a reason why. And there has to be a way that this works." And I turned around and I went home. And 3 days later, I got a phone call from a guy, and he said, "I want you to come out to California and speak to my class." And, it was an automotive design class at an automotive design school out there, and nobody ever invited me to do that before. He said, "I want you to come and talk about designing cars for people in chairs." And I said, "I'd be happy to." And so they flew me and my family out there, and we spent a week in California, and I'd never been to California, and for some reason where I was, I just while I was there, I've read this before from certain spiritual teachers that if you get out of the geographical location that you're at and you're in a new place, that because it's new to your consciousness, it opens you up to new experiences and deeper insight. And I've actually found this to be true in other parts of my life. But for some reason, when I was out there, I just had this deep spiritual experience where I just and it was there was nothing profound about being out in California or even California itself. It was just I don't know what it was. It was just but I was just supposed to be in that place at that time. And I felt this urge that I needed to meditate. And I didn't know about meditation. I'd never tried it. I'd studied all this religion and done a lot of praying, but I didn't know anything about meditation. So I came home and I started to meditate to the best of my ability. And the more I began to do that, the more I began to fall in love with it. And I found for the first time in my life, I felt like I had peace in myself. I was getting this taste of peace. And in meditation, I was able to get into a place mentally where I didn't feel limited by the wheelchair anymore. I felt like I had control over my life. I felt like I was creative and I felt like I was clear in my thoughts. It wasn't a permanent state, but it was something that had changed me and enough to the point that I knew that I was on the track of something. And then about a year later, I met this guy and we just started talking. We had become friends. And he said, "Have you ever read a book called The Kabbalion?" I know there's probably a lot of your listeners that have read that book. A lot of people are familiar with The Kabbalion. I said, "No, what is it?" They said, "It's a short book. You should just go get it." So I went that night and I found it online and opened that book and it said, "The universe is mental, all is mind." And when I read that phrase, it was like, you talk about an aha moment. It was like a bomb went off in my consciousness, and everything that I had studied, it was almost like everything in my life had led me up to that moment. And I really believe that it did. And it pulled together all of these traditions that I had searched and all of the symbolism and the different, esoteric things that I had read and the historical things. And it just pulled them into one point of focus. And it just made sense that we are part of an infinite living consciousness and that the one aspect of man that makes us divine beings is our capacity for thought. And it was at that moment that I realized that I have no control over my outward circumstances. The one thing that every human being has control over is what they think. And that just it blew my mind. Like I was sitting at my computer holding my head going, "Oh my god, this is intense. Where have I been?" And in that book also it talked about the tradition of the Hermetic teachers. It talked about what's called the mystery tradition. And that was like, okay, if this is a tradition and somebody knows about this, then there's got to be somebody that can teach me how to master my mind. And so that process took 5 years for me to find a school, and uh, and I did, and it was that was another miraculous set of circumstances, but that would probably take a whole other podcast to talk about. So I know that's a long story, but that's how I came to the tradition that I work in now and am a part of. And I can say that I have found a training system that does indeed teach you how to master your mind. And through that process, I've discovered the answers to the questions of why. And that
Mhm.
has been the most powerful, illuminating, life changing experience that I have ever known. And that's how I wrote the book. And that's how I'm here today. So,
Sure. There's so
yeah.
many questions, bro.
Yeah.
So let's somebody listening to this right now and then thinking to themselves, like, you were a follower of Christian faith, you went through all the
Yeah.
religions, right? And then you found this uh, this type of tradition. Like, how does it differ from the religious dogma that you were accustomed to before?
Okay. Wow. That's a loaded question. Um, excuse me. So basically, the best way that I could describe it and kind of give an analogy is that, well, I don't know if that's going to work either. Religion is in every religion at their root has an esoteric influence or a tradition or a founder. All the world religions, whether it's Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, even Islam, and Christianity, all of the symbolism and all of the teachings are symbolic ultimately, and they're symbolic of universal truths of human consciousness, and they all speak to a higher reality and a higher process, and they all speak to the divine nature that is inherent within every human being. And what has happened, or happens on the material level, is that we as humans, when we embrace the material plane as the ultimate reality, as the reality, and we embrace it as and believe that we are separate from God, that we are separate from each other, that we're separate from life, what we do is we begin to build religious structures around that belief in separation. And so instead of interpreting the true teachings that Christ or Buddha or any of these teachers brought, they never set out to establish a religion. They just taught. You know, Christ said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." Well, so did the Egyptians. You know, it's there. But we took that as and we turned it into something external where we believe that we're separate. And the belief in separation from the divine is ultimately the cause of material suffering and our separation from each other. And so by doing so, we put all that is evil off on another external force, something outside ourselves. Well, what is that? That's the devil. You know, we create a demon basically in our own awareness because we don't want to look at the demon in ourselves. And so we need somebody to blame it on. We need somebody to say, well, I didn't, the devil made me do it. Or, you know, this person is influenced by the devil, or, you know, this is this is of the devil and this is of God, or this is right and this is wrong. And this is and so because of that, then we need a savior. We need somebody to come in and save us. And ultimately, what we do is instead of looking in ourselves and taking responsibility, we think an external savior is going to save us from our own sin. And there's a lot of people that might hear that and think, "Oh, that's blasphemy." But if you really look at the truth, of what is being said in the scriptures and what is being said in the Vedic texts and what is being said, they're pointing to you. They're saying this is within you. And so whenever we separate it out and we create a religious structure, then we create a system that doesn't allow us ultimately to experience higher realities. It doesn't allow us to experience unity. It just keeps us locked into this material belief and separation. And the more we do that, we remain immature and we don't ultimately evolve and we don't take responsibility and we don't grow. So that for me in my experience and in my opinion is the difference between religion. The mystery tradition, the esoteric tradition, takes a step beyond that. It says it looks at the universal truth that is in those teachings and it applies them in a way that ultimately can change and develop the subconscious mind through symbolism, through ritual, through prayer and study and meditation. And it can work with symbols. It can work. We see it in all the traditions. For example, the mandalas in the Eastern tradition. You see it in the monks meditating on an icon. You see it in. I mean, well, we have it even in the Catholic Church where you do the Stations of the Cross. This is meditation on symbolism. It all depends on what you do with it and your purpose. And so that system is really what the mystery tradition is. It's the use of uh, these tools to create a shift in the mind, in the subconscious. And by changing the subconscious mind, you begin to shift your own behavior patterns. Because a lot of people ask themselves, well, well, I don't know why I am the way that I am, or I can't help what I think, or I can't help what I feel, or I you know, or I don't know why I act this way. Well, that's the whole purpose of the development of the esoteric tradition is to master yourself and to master your character and your behavior and your motivating factors and all the things that drive you. And so through that process of development, it begins to be the perfection of the character and by perfecting the character, by changing the patterns in the subconscious mind, your outer world begins to change. The circumstances around you begin to change. You begin to understand them. You begin to understand your relationships with your family and your friends and the people around you, and why you are the way that you are and why you experience what you experience. And so that is really the difference, and that becomes the direct experience. And so by doing that, by going through that process of training and development systematically, and those things begin to unfold, then you begin to experience unity because you begin to see that there's no difference between you and the other and that you're not separate from God and that you have this creative power within you. And so and really, that's if you look at the spiritual traditions, whether it's the Shaolin monks disciplining themselves, whether it's living in an ashram, the Western tradition is very different from that. But that will give people a point of references. That's what they're doing. They're changing their consciousness through self discipline and perfecting the character. But that we see that tradition in the West. A lot of people don't know that there's a Western tradition that the symbols of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam come out of. Um, and that tradition has been preserved for thousands of years. And so that's really the difference. It's either religion is based on mere belief and a mental assent, and the Western tradition is the spiritual esoteric tradition is built on direct experience through training.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. I definitely noticed the difference between the dogmatic approach of God is outside of me, is external of me, and then having to do things to be rewarded for my relationship with that being,
Absolutely.
as opposed to me, like taking, that esoteric stance of experience and like
Hmm.
how I can deepen that connection with everything that around me. And
Hmm.
if consciousness is fundamental to this reality, like the smallest acts of kindness affects it, like my
Yeah.
conversation with the tree or the plant or grass or People are like, "What are you talking about? The tree?" Like, but if consciousness is fundamental, everything around me right now in my material reality is consciousness. My relationship to this desk, my relationship to this mic, my relationship to
Yeah.
this little Saint Michael token thing here is, if I can project like a love towards that, I'm affecting consciousness, and so it affects
Mm.
me, and so it changes me. My reality starts changing when I understand my direct correlation to this reality. And it's, to your point earlier, it's a mirror, right? Like you're being shown
Right.
what's inside of you, essentially. But what is fascinating to me is like how you were able to have this tragic accident, but then like take full responsibility for it too. Like that was a total realization in the book when I was reading that, obviously there's a lot in between the accident and the total
Yeah.
realization of
Yeah.
that. But can you just talk to people about that? Like, how do you take responsibility for something that seems like it was an accident, and how did you create that for yourself?
Whew. Well, I think that came from spending a lot of time meditating on the law of cause and effect, and ultimately understanding that if the law of cause and effect applies in the little things, then it applies in the big things. And if there's not, we have a tendency, because it's very easy to blame external circumstances, or to blame fate, or to blame chance. But there's a quote in the Kabbalion that I love. It says that chance is but a name for a law that's not yet recognized. And everything in the universe happens by law. And that was one of the first things that really helped me to develop that mindset and to take responsibility for what had happened to me. And what that was understanding that, okay, if we start from the place of gravity, something as simple as gravity on the material plane, something as simple as um, Newtonian physics, or some of the you know the natural laws that govern the universe. Well, then the question arises: if there are natural laws and there are higher laws, then or let me rephrase that: if there are physical natural laws, then then what about our mind and our will and our emotions? There must be laws that govern them as well, or are they just random? There has to be a way. And that was really the question: was, okay, if there are laws that govern the material realm, then there have to be higher laws that govern our mind and our will and our emotions. And if they are laws, then breaking laws would result in something destructive. And so the question then arose for me was, okay, how did I break those laws? And if I did, how do I discover what I did? And so um I think one of the things that came, and this is funny, Trey, I've never even said this to anybody, but I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think that sometimes in life we have to be desperate. How bad do you want it? And that sometimes, and I think this happens with trauma. I think that traumatic things that happen to people, you can either go one of two ways. You can either get totally bitter and bury yourself and never take responsibility for it, or it creates a kind of drive, almost like an animal that's just determined to grab hold of something with its teeth and find out what it is. And you just grab a hold of it and you're like, this happened. Okay. I'm here in this reality. I'm dealing with this now. This is the rock that is in front of me, and I'm going to push it, and I'm going to find out what this is. And so I think that had something to do with it. And I'm not saying that because I'm special. That's just what I felt. It was a deep determination that whatever this is, I'm going to find out why and how. and take the responsibility. And so taking responsibility for the accident, it was in stages. It's not something that happened overnight. The first things the first thing for anybody watching this, I didn't just one day wake up and say, "Oh yeah, this is I created this and now I take responsibility." The first thing that had to happen was layers of responsibility. Working up to, okay, I'm responsible for how I talk to this person. I'm responsible for whether I'm grateful in this situation or not. I have to take responsibility for the fact that I did not do what I needed to do to take care of my health. I have to take it's steps, layers and layers of, the expression great power comes with great responsibility. With responsibility comes great power comes responsibility. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
But yeah, but you get the point.
Yeah.
But the greater and great, like, there's a reason I'm not president of the United States. I'm not qualified. So I don't have that level of responsibility. I can't have that kind of power, And spiritual development is much that same way. You go back to what you said a little bit ago. One of the reasons we don't experience higher realities is because if we did, if at our level of ethical development, we could be very destructive beings if we did.
Well, that too, and then also where are you at psychically, or where's your psychic at, or psychic? Where is your psyche at to where can
Yes.
you handle that amount of like I don't even know what they look like, but like if I were to all of a sudden remember everything that I've ever been, like the overload of that information, of everything that I've lost, everything that I've been
Oh,
a part of,
yeah.
everything that I've, all the bad things that I've ever done in incarnation,
Yeah.
like that would be totally overload for me. And
Oh, it
people,
crushes. Yeah.
yeah, and people have these memories and then they have these psychoses where they can't handle
Yeah.
this reality because they are remembering what they have been.
Oh,
And
for sure.
but I
There's
mean,
an
like, but to your point about responsibility, I mean, dude, I read your story. You were what, 16 and you dove headfirst in a pool that you shouldn't have been diving in. But to say that I take full responsibility of that, like to some would say, what are you talking about, man? You were just a kid and you dove headfirst in a pool that you couldn't see the bottom and you were doing it for a girl, which most men would say, you know what, man, like there's a lot of things I've done, for a girl that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do in that moment, but to take full responsibility for that because now you fractured your C5, C6 vertebrae in
Yeah.
your neck and you're paralyzed for up to this point. How does someone take responsibility? What does that look like?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, I can really speak to that. First of all, I want to say something about what you just said about seeing into your past life and what it would do to affect your personality. And I'm going to recommend a book. It's um it's a novel. It's kind of rare. It's called The Red Lion, and you can get it on Amazon. It's amazing. I am not sure about how much of a true story it actually is, but it's a novel that talks about the what can happen to a soul when they immediately see into all their past lives.
Sure.
And it's dramatic. And but it's eye-opening. And reading that book was a step in my journey because one of the things that really um that was instrumental in being able to take responsibility was understanding the reality of reincarnation. And I know that's going to sound strange to a lot of people. We don't want to think about that. But the the truth of reincarnation is something that I have I feel and I've come to experience is something that humanity must eventually embrace as a whole. And the reason is because in order to take responsibility, we have to understand that we are where we are because at some point we thought, spoke, or acted in a wrong way. Or maybe not wrong, maybe the best word is a destructive way, a way that is opposite the laws of the universe. But in order to understand that, we have to understand that that is something that we created over time. It's not something that we just ultimately did because of some random decision. There is no random. And so the process of reincarnation is an unfolding process, and it's happening all the time. It's the law of cause and effect. And for every cause, there's an effect, and an effect for every cause. And even in this moment, this conversation that you and I are having is an effect of a cause, but it's also going to become a cause for another effect, because eventually somebody is going to watch this and it's going to inspire them, hopefully, to do something that they've never done before, or a new way of thinking, or a new way of seeing, or a relationship, a friendship between you and I is developing. So we're developing this rapport, we're having this conversation. That's another effect. That's another connection. That's another synapse in our brain and another level of consciousness. So we tend to parcel out every experience as good or bad because of that. But we don't realize that, I mean, even something as simple as what you had for breakfast this morning has a karmic consequence. It has a result. If you went to a fast food restaurant and you got some garbage meal and a cup of coffee, the karmic result of that is, chances are by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to feel like garbage.
Sure.
But if you took the time to eat something that was going to make you feel energized and healthy, then you're going to have the result of that. So, meditating on that karma and understanding that there was a reason, there had to be a reason. That was really the beginning, was, if there's a reason, what is it? And accepting the fact that there was a reason, and accepting that law, and spending time meditating on, okay, there's a cause. There's a cause, and it starts with me. And if there's a cause and it starts with me, then how did that evolve? And if it evolved, it had to evolve over either multiple lifetimes, or because there was something within my psyche that facilitated this experience. And so that really was it. It was the desire to know. It was a desire ultimately to take responsibility for anything, and to make any change. It starts with a desire. We can't do anything without desire. Desires are the fuel that drive change for in any direction. If you don't have a desire to be successful, you listen to the great entrepreneurs of the world, they are driven with desire. And it's not just greed. It's not just, they have a desire to create, and they will stop. And that's why they'll work 18 to 20-hour days and go and go and go and go and not be with their family, because that desire is driving them. And I think there's a lot to be said for hunger. When you're hungry, I mean, look at an athlete, like what they'll do. They'll miss time with friends and family, and get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just beat their bodies to hell, because they're driven with that desire. And so I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you all at the same time, but ultimately that was it, was really recognizing I was here before, and I'll be here again, and the universe is eternal. And if nothing ever really dies, everything is eternal and an infinite creator, then what do I have to fear? Why do I need to fear taking responsibility? Why do I need to fear looking? And this goes back to what we said at the beginning about really looking into the darker parts of yourself. If there's an infinite creator, then there has to be mercy. If there is justice, then there has to be mercy. And if there is mercy, then there's mercy for this, for anything. And I can look into it without being afraid. And that goes for anybody, whether you've had a diving accident or whether you're in prison for child abuse. There's mercy for you if you're willing to take responsibility. And that requires looking at it, accepting it, and recognizing that nothing is lost. There's no experience in the universe that is meaningless. Nothing is wasted ever. And that was another thing too, that really, this is kind of interesting that you brought this up, because one of the things was mortality, was the idea of physical death, because I came very close to dying. And it was like, okay, well, what happens if you die? You know, and what happens after you die? That was a big one, you know? And so, yeah, so I'm saying a lot of things at one time. I don't know if that really
It's
answered
all
your
good, man.
question.
Yeah, dude, I
But,
just like listening to you talk because I feel like, a lot of people can resonate who have had tragedy in their lives. I think a lot of them may not be able to accept the full responsibility or an extreme ownership of their
mhm,
accident wherever they're at. But I mean, looking at the cause and effect law of Hermeticism, well, looking at all the laws of Hermeticism has really enlightened me to the functioning of the universe. But then, I always wonder too, like if there's just one mind that is the creator of all, like how can it judge itself, right? And what are they judging against? Or, like that's how I think about it. It's like how if it's all just one concept of one mind and one thought, like how can that one mind determine what is good or bad? It's like it's because of its itself and what is its reference point for good or bad. I don't. It's a rabbit hole that I go down quite a bit, but
sure.
reeling it back in because I have to do that sometimes.
Yeah,
And
right, I'm with you. Yeah, for sure.
you talk about the innate power of creation inside of us, right?
Mhm.
How do you harness that creation power? Like, have you done it in your life to where you've manifested something or used it to access different dimensions of yourself that were latent before?
I would say yes. Um, the creative power that's within all of us is ultimately using the will to direct your thoughts and emotions and your words, your actions. Because the subconscious is what creates this reality. And the collective subconscious of humanity is what creates the material reality. So we have a universal subconscious mind, we have the collective subconscious mind, and then the individual, each one of us has a subconscious mind. And we're each responsible for what we feed that subconscious mind. So that's why it's so important to be careful what you watch and what you listen to and the conversations that you engage in and the way that you respond in situations. And so by being conscious of what I feed my brain, what I listen to, and what I talk about, and being authentic and truthful. One of the big ones for me was just being honest about what I feel in the moment, you know? Um, we underestimate the little things. We often think that creative power is affirmations and manifesting and doing deep meditations and going to yoga retreats or all of these different things or a crystal or but creative power is just as simple as how you talk to your wife or how
True.
you talk to your friends
Well,
or
think about it
what you
right
talk
now,
about.
dude. Like me having this conversation with you, just I can be nothing. I can close my eyes and have an awareness of nothing and then open them and then I am something, right? That's
Yeah, yeah,
creating something from nothing, the potentiality of creating. Like we just take
yeah,
it for granted because we get so caught up with distractions of like,
yeah,
the concentration part that you were talking about in your book to where we have so
yeah,
many distractions in our lives of where like we have fragmented awareness. And
yeah. We
I
do.
feel like our attention is our life force. It's like,
It,
and
yes,
everything is trying to take that from us. And being able to go within and find your own answers, like when people say that, that used to confuse me. But if I like slowly close my eyes and settle myself, like there are answers that arise through me. And then there's experiences that I can have, like physically, to where if I have my awareness and use it to take that life source energy from the perineum up to the
right.
sacred, I can feel, I can get in different altered states of consciousness, not ordinary states
Yeah,
of consciousness. So the attention to me, like that's been the biggest realization is how much my attention goes out into this
hmm,
reality and it's not focused on anything. And I see the direct consequences of that when I can't focus on something, a task for more than 4 seconds, or if I can't get into deep
yeah,
learning, or if I have memory issues, is because of the brain injuries that are occurring because of my attention and my awareness being somewhere else. What are your
yeah.
thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. I think your desires even follow your attention. I mean, the that's the power of the conscious mind is it's like a valve. It can direct the energy. And one of the things that has been really instrumental in my life is recognizing that conscious concentration, the power of and that's really the Western mystery tradition is really built around concentration. It's really built on concentrating the thought process. And we don't realize how much as a society we have a lack of concentration. I mean, we everything is click and go and scroll and all of this stuff, and it's constant and it's everywhere. And that is ultimately a waste of the creative power. It's like if you had a fire hose and you've got that nozzle that causes water to just, I mean, there are some tools that use water to cut stone. I mean, it's a potent force when it's harnessed. But if you just cut that hose in half, that water's just going to go everywhere. You know, you could concentrate light to the point of a laser, or you could have just a light bulb with no that just disperses light everywhere. That's what it's like. You know, if you looked at a movie projector where that lens fine tunes that picture and projects it on a screen, your consciousness is very much like that, you know? And so that is creative power, is ultimately what are you concentrating on? What are you thinking about? And when you and that's why the process of meditation is so essential for development, because it allows you to concentrate your awareness on your thoughts and observe your thoughts and observe your breathing and observe your whole inner state of being, your emotions and what you feel, instead of looking around at this, you know, what this person said or what that person said or what, what Harry and Meghan are doing or what, what Donald Trump is doing or what Kamala Harris is doing or what, what's happening in, Elon Musk said this and this is on Joe Rogan and all these personalities and this movie's coming out and that movie and, this new, and we're just bombarded with all this stuff, but
It's
we're
all
not,
traps, man. It's all
it's all
traps.
traps. It's just a trap. And, and so ultimately what happens is that we we don't realize how much we do it. I mean, it's really, it's so easy to fall into, even just like, one of just like scrolling through Instagram 10 minutes before you go to bed. Like, what are you doing? It's
Dude,
like,
but that's the thing, like, it always like, there's something going on where something wants our attention. Like, what is that
yeah,
something? You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, that's where I go into conspiracy theories and, like, is that like, Eric Gotzi, I just started got I think that's how you say his last name. I've recently turned on to his work, and he talks about the shimmer. He talks about the internet and how it, I'm not gonna go it's deep theory, like, it's complicated. I don't know exactly 100% what he's talking about, but I can kinda
Mhm.
grasp what he's talking about as far as the awareness and our concentration. But, like, something is feeding off our energy, our life force, and I don't know what that is, and he calls it the shimmer, and it could be the internet and whatever that's related to, but, taking your power back is seeing the distractions for what they are. They want your attention. Bring that life force back within to create a different reality for yourself. I mean,
Yeah,
ultimately is the answer. And then to your point, again, the answers are within you. When you take that concentration in and reflect and
yeah,
meditate on the questions, like every question has a solution already. You just have to
yeah,
find it.
yeah. And ultimately, when we begin to use that concentration constructively, we begin to use it harmoniously and transform that. Because when we begin to concentrate and we begin to concentrate our emotions, we begin to focus them into our subconscious. And we begin to tell our subconscious, this is what I want. This is what I think. This is what we feel. And as that happens, the outer world begins to change. Um,
Can I just make a really quick joke about
yeah,
that,
for
right? So in
sure.
your book, we talk about gender, right? And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the conscious mind is the male side of
The
that, and the
masculine
yeah,
side.
the
Yeah.
masculine, the unconscious is the feminine, right? So it's always, of course, in my reality, the unconscious rules my world like it does at home. So it's like I got to make the feminine happy to get the
You got to make
desires
the
that I
feminine
want.
happy.
You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Oh, but what I was okay. So I'm going to ask you a really really hard question, right? So in
Yeah.
concentration, and that you have this life altering injury where you're paralyzed, do you think that you could ultimately use your concentration to self heal?
I know of people that have done it, and I definitely believe it's possible. Um, I am on a journey to healing physically. I I believe that the mind can change matter 100%. Um, if the material world is a projection of the thought and consciousness in the mind of God, then developing your your awareness and your ability to do that is totally possible. Um, I do meditations for working, with to, bring healing into my body. But part of how I do that is not just focusing on my body, but focusing on the parts of myself. So, for example, instead of looking at, okay, I've got this symptom in my body, I look at how I feel about it, and I look for the emotional connection of that and work with that. And as I begin to do that, the symptoms begin to change, or the answer comes. But also another thing too is that it can be very easy on a path sometimes, particularly people who embrace spiritual teaching, is that we often think that, okay, now that we're on this spiritual path, we don't need the material. But there's a reason for taking action. The spiritual path is only as good as the action that you take. And one of the things I've learned from my teachers is that, okay, let's say maybe you have uh, autoimmune disease, or you have like a arthritis or a chronic problem or something. You should know more about that problem than the doctor. You should know more about it than anyone, because it's something that you are experiencing for a reason. So all of the knowledge, I mean, we live in the information age. You can find it at the click of a button. So we need to educate ourselves. And the reason is not so that you can necessarily think about, oh, I have this problem and this is, and, so that you can be really knowledgeable at parties, talk to your friends about it, but because we have to take action. It's not enough to just sit and meditate all day long.
Well,
Part of
it's the
the
balance. It's the balance of the
It's the
masculine and feminine,
balance.
right? The
Yeah,
masculine is the
exactly.
action part, right?
Yeah,
Like, as much as
yeah,
you want to implant in the unconscious the feminine side, you still have to
yeah.
balance that with the action side.
And also that action communicates to the subconscious, this is what we're doing now. This is where we are, and we're gonna deal with this. And it causes us, one of the things about the Western tradition is it doesn't, you hear a lot in certain spiritual traditions about the world of Maya, the world of illusion, and, oh, this is all an illusion, and you just need to get over the illusion. But we're here in the material realm for a reason. This material realm is just as much a part of God as all that exists. And so we're here to experience it. So the way to truth and the way to unity is to dive into it and embrace it for what it is and say, okay, I've got this problem. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm here and I'm now, and I broke my neck. Now I got to deal with it. And then how do I do that? What are the tools that are available to me now at humanity's level of evolution? I've got this therapy available to me. I've got homeopathy. I've got Ayurveda. I've got traditional Chinese medicine. I got acupuncture. I got herbal remedies. I've got light therapy. I've got different kinds of medications. I've got exercise. I've got all these things. I've got diet. What are the nutrients that I need in my body? And by doing that, that becomes part of the meditation. So that by sitting all day, meditating, I'm actually meditating every moment and participating in the universal meditation of life by taking part of life and implementing the truth and learning. And what am I doing? I'm educating myself. I'm creating new neural pathways in my brain, new synapses, new information. What happens at the end of that process? I become a blessing to other people, because now I can go back to the person that has had this experience and say, this is what you need to know. You can do
Mm.
this. I can make myself a servant of humanity. So that's ultimately what we do with that experience, is we turn around and we share it with other people. And that is, it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. You want to talk about a Christian tradition.
Well, the
So
law of reciprocity, right? Like, the more that you
absolutely.
give, right? Like, the more that you
Absolutely.
give of yourself, the more you receive.
Yeah. And so the
But
more I give, the more that healing energy becomes available to me, you know, and that material reality will begin to change. But yes, absolutely. So,
yeah, I'm a big fan of Tom Campbell's work, and he talks about how beliefs really hinder our reality and create a lot of the pain and suffering because of our, obviously it's entrenched in our being and our subconscious mind. And so, like, I think the modalities that you're speaking of, all the the therapies and everything like that, like,
Sure.
helps our belief, right? Like, so for some reason, there's a belief that is hindering us, that we can't do something, but through the tools of meditation, through the tools of therapies,
Mhm.
through the tools of different modalities, they kind of soften that belief to where one day that relief is no longer there, and then you experience what you call a miracle. And that's another thing I wanted to hit on before we wrap everything up, because you said miracle. You looked at miracles as outside of you, right? They're external, or they're a gift
Mhm.
from God, right? So I don't mean to project that definition on you, thinking that miracles are external, but like, what is it? I mean, what is your definition of a miracle? Is it external of us, and how do you create healing to ultimately create your own miracle? I guess.
Well, I wanna speak to what you just something you said right before that, and I'll address that, is that w all the modalities that I just mentioned, I've actually seen them work on a lot of people and then not work on anybody. And but the what I've noticed to be the defining line between the 2 are those that are doing it, "Well, I'll just see if this works." And then those that are like, "Yeah, this is awesome." So, ultimately, it still starts in the mind. It still starts in your perception. And, so
Mhm.
really it's about embracing, it's about you being being open-minded, Um, but as far as a miracle is concerned,
I guess my question would be: is a miracle external? If it's external, what is it that's inside of us? That what would you term what happens inside of us that we create? You know what I mean?
oh, okay. Well
If God creates miracles and that's external of us, like, what do we create from the eternal power?
ultimately, I don't believe that everything in my experience that an external thing just happens. There has to be a trigger on the inside of that soul. There has to be a harmony, a resonance within that human being. And that could be it could be through their complete belief that something is going to work. It could be through a lot of different factors, but ultimately it's going to come out of you or me. Ultimately, you may not see that connection. We may not know exactly what that is, but it doesn't matter. It's still coming out of you. And but what I would say is that in order to create a what we would consider to be a miracle, it still takes work. And
Yeah,
that work may take 15 minutes, that work may take 15 years, but it still takes work because ultimately it's a change within. It's a change in perception because a change in perception is a change in reality. And so a miracle is a change in reality, you
sure.
know?
But it's
So
like I've heard stories of miracle healings, of
oh,
like
yeah.
instantaneous healings. Like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about it. Like, I've had different healers that
Yeah.
I've had conversations with that automatically changed in front of them. But
Yeah. No, it's real.
it
Yeah, for
wasn't something
sure.
that they did. It was like they became a new person. Now, whether you want to call that like quantum jumping or whatever you want to call jumping into a different timeline, maybe that's just the definition of what we think is happening. But ultimately, you got to become something different. So,
You
like,
do.
what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I would just go back to what I just said. You it is a shift in perception, and shifts in perception can happen in an instant. I've had them happen in an instant. I've had instances of a shift, and then suddenly my body felt better. Um, but ultimately, for me, the real miracle is the change on the inside. And that again can happen in an instant because the only perception that we really have of time is because of the material plane. Everything the Kabbalists talk about the fact that once you say something, it's in existence and it's real. So because on the higher levels of plane, the only reason we have time is so that we can experience the law of cause and effect. If we really experience reality as it is, everything that we thought and said would happen instantaneously. So
Well,
In a good
I shake my head yes, but I have no
you're
idea what that
all
looks
right.
like.
But if we actually experienced that, that would be very, chaotic
Well, let
on
me
the
ask you
machine.
this, right? I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
know that we can go down 1,000 rabbit holes right now, but, like, when you said that, that triggered a thought. Like, so if man's purpose or humanity's purpose is to experience itself, like, maybe if God's like, I always hear people say that, the one separated so that it can know thyself, right?
Mhm.
To know what it is. So what is humanity's purpose? Is it to know thyself? And then what does that look like? What is the full potential of humanity or the human?
Wow. I think that one's above my pay grade, but I definitely understand what you're saying. Um, there's this, and I'll end with this. There's actually a quote in the Kabbalion where he talks about, he says that, why does the all create worlds? And it says that, according to legend, that when Hermes was asked that question, he refused to answer. So if he refused to answer, then who are we to question? So that's an interesting way to think about it.
That is
But I definitely, and I think part of that is I think the question that you asked there, Trey, though, is a powerful question because I think it's inherent within all of us. And I think it goes back to, what is my purpose and why? And really, ultimately, when we discover the why, for me, that is the miracle. That's the real miracle.
that's the mystery. It's like
That is the
to
mystery.
know
Yeah.
thyself. Like, what are you
Know
capable of?
thyself. Yeah.
To what extent, what potentiality is
Yeah.
that? I mean, to say it, what you think it is to limit it. Maybe that's why he didn't answer it, because he didn't want to
Yeah.
put limits on it.
Because you and I are limitless. We really actually are. It's it's a radical thing.
We say
Yeah,
this, right? But, like,
we
yeah.
do.
We
But
say it
it's
like that.
we say it, but I really believe that I think that that we say it because somehow it's in our DNA. It's just written in us. And I think that every single one of us, no matter how challenging our life has been or how crazy or how where we might be on the evolutionary scale of life or whatever, there is something within every single human soul, no matter how dark, no matter how evil, they know somehow that they are bigger than this.
Sure. Um, and you talked about, I don't know. In your book, you said something, and I had just recently had a conversation with Paul Wallace about the Elohim, and
Mhm.
you said something in your book about the Elohim creating man. Can you dive into that a little bit before we end this? Because that was a huge nugget that I wanted to tap into. Like, who are the Elohim?
The Elohim, the word Elohim, literally translated from Kabbalah, is the creator deities, the entities that formed man in their own image. Now, getting into who and what that is actually a little bit above my pay grade in the mystery tradition, and it would require a little bit of mind bending and some training in the mystery tradition facility or tradition. Um, but they are the creative forces of the universe, and they are taught largely in the Hermetic Kabbalah tradition. So, um,
That just validates what Paul was talking about, where he went
yeah,
down to the root meaning of the word Elohim, because we thought it was the term for God when it means it's plural for gods.
yeah, it's a plural word. Yeah,
So then again, it's like, so again, going back to the Bible, like, how much of that is misinterpreted to make us think the way that we do.
yeah. Well, I will say this: in my experience and from what I've learned and what I've been taught by people who know a lot more than I do, and it's verified that they know a lot more than I do, that the Bible, as we know it, was originally intended by initiates for initiates who had been initiated into a deep historical tradition, and it contains deep, deep symbolism about the nature of man. And when it is taken out of context and interpreted literally, and a lot of the English tradition has completely been bastardized and said that it said something that it actually did not. But those those phrases have been used by religion, but they mean something completely different than
Hmm.
what has been taught. Yeah, for sure. There's a great book on this called um, the Kabbalah. It's called the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, I believe. It's by a man named Elias Rubinstein. I highly recommend it to anybody. I can actually, I'll get back to you on the exact title of the book, but
Yeah,
it's,
man, I feel like we could just talk for days, man.
oh, for sure.
But Caleb, thank you so much for taking the time, my friend.
Yeah, it's been an honor.
How can people find you? How can they buy the book?
Well, the book is called The Light Above and Within, Walking Through Disability on the Spiritual Path. It's on Amazon, and you can find me on YouTube, The Light Above and Within YouTube channel. If you search it on YouTube, you'll find it. And I'm sure we can include the link in the description below or something like that. And and then there's a whole lot of tools and recommendations on that website, that on that channel. I provide some other links to the the school that I belong to, that I study with, and some resources, some online libraries and things, that people are interested in that, and they can always email me as well if they have any questions through the channel. So
Awesome. Caleb, my brother,
yeah,
man,
man.
thank you so much for
I
taking the
appreciate
time.
it, Trey. You got it, man. It's been good. So we'll talk more sometime soon.